Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, hope you've all been doing well. In this video, I wanted to talk about something really bizarre I've recently just came across. I never really planned on making this video, but some of the stuff I was seeing here, I thought it would be worth mentioning to you guys. Now, I've been actually in the middle of doing my Ryzen 9 3900X upgrade, but before I take out the old parts out of my case and put the new ones in, I was doing some benchmarks so I can show you guys the results and what kind of improvements I'll be able to achieve with the upgrade over the 1800X. It's all for my upcoming review, of course. But anyways, while running some gaming benchmarks, I noticed that the results I was getting from some titles in my benchmark suite, they appeared to be quite a bit lower than some of the results I've shown you guys in the past. I'm of course retesting all the games, as over time the system has gone through quite a few changes on the software side of things, whether it's new drivers or Windows updates. So I just didn't want to recycle old numbers and then include fresh results for the new CPU. I'm also including some titles I've used in the past with some new additions as well, so you guys can get a much broader picture on performance improvements and how much the CPUs do in some games compared to a few others. A few of the games I'm retesting include titles like Far Cry 5, Middle-earth Shadow of War, Battlefield 1, and many more. However, when I recorded the benchmark results, and keep in mind I was doing multiple runs to ensure consistency, the numbers just seemed very off to me. Like, they weren't as high as I had gotten them before. In regards to the settings I was using for all the games, they were all set at a resolution of 1080p with the high preset applied, therefore representing a realistic scenario that at the same time wouldn't really incur a GPU bottleneck as well. Well, I am using a 1080 Ti. The other thing was that extra post-processing of effects like motion blur were disabled, along with VSync for obvious reasons. These were the same settings I was using for the 7 different RAM speeds tested on Ryzen video, so I went back and compared the results I was getting now to the old results, and yeah, what I saw was that I was getting considerably lower results. Like I had mentioned earlier, since the system had gone through some changes and updates, I wouldn't expect numbers to be exactly the same. There will be some slight differences, give or take. But some of the results that I got, the differences were just way too drastic to call it a mere update or driver change. One title in particular showed a drop of around 33%, so something was definitely wrong here. What I did next was that I went through a series of troubleshooting steps, both hardware-wise and software-wise, to see what could have been the issue. I checked all my drivers, made sure they were up to date, or checked to see which of the recent versions was the most stable driver. I did a complete install of them as well. I went into the BIOS, made sure all my settings were correct, checked my CPU overclock settings, checked my RAM overclock, and made sure the timings were all set correctly. I was also going through all the programs I had installed, services, to make sure nothing was unnecessarily hogging resources. I tried both enabling and disabling Windows HPET, changed the power plans, tried game mode on and off, monitor temps to make sure nothing was thermal throttling, along with, checking fans to make sure they were coming on and actually doing their job. I tried a whole bunch of stuff and I really wasn't able to figure it out, until I asked myself, what is something different that I'm doing this time around? And the answer was staring at me in the face. I was using AMD's OCAT overlay this time around to benchmark my games. In the past, I've used good old Fraps for DirectX 11 titles, and for DirectX 12 or Vulkan, I was using MSI Afterburner with Rivatuner statistics. At first, I was thinking it would be unlikely that an FPS overlay or benchmarking tool could drop performance like that, but it's happened before in the past as well, where there were reports of MSI Afterburner's overlay causing a performance hit on Radeon graphics cards, whereas Nvidia GPUs were just fine. So I decided to stop using OCAT and go back to using my old methods for attaining performance data. When I did that, I immediately noticed that most of the games were showing much better results as opposed to what I was getting with OCAT. I just thought that it was pretty odd, and I'm not really sure as to why OCAT is causing these issues with some of these games. So I have recorded the benchmark results, and we'll go over some titles here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Far Cry 5 was one of the first titles I benchmarked, and here you guys can see that there is a significant difference in terms of the average frame rate, along with the 1% and 0.1% lows, where the average frame rate using Fraps was recorded at 125 frames per second. However, with OCAT, it was just 103 frames per second, a loss of 21%. That's quite noticeable, especially if you have a 120 or 144 Hz monitor. Along with that, even the frame time results were a lot smoother, a difference of 57% for the 0.1% lows. With the OCAT, the dips were a lot more noticeable. Just to show you guys what I mean, I did include a side-by-side video showcasing this weird phenomenon. On the left side is the recording with Fraps monitoring the frame rate, and on the right side is where I used OCAT to monitor the frame rate. And you guys can see for yourselves, performance is significantly lower on the right side, the run that's using OCAT. Absolutely nothing changed here, except for the benchmarking tool. The system and game settings were all the same, but for some reason one causes a huge performance drop over the other. Moving on, the next game we'll be taking a look at is GTA 5. Again, with the average frame rate, we're seeing a difference of around 15%. Although the frame time results were also lower, but not by much, still lower though. Up next was Middle-earth: Shadow of War, and just like the previously two tested titles, this game displayed similar behavior, where the average frame rate without OCAT was recorded at 160 frames per second average, and with OCAT it dropped to 127 FPS average, a loss of around 26%. The 1% and 0.1% lows also showed quite substantial decreases. We're looking at a difference of 23 and 32% respectively, where without OCAT the resulted performance is a lot smoother, but with it on, it does also tend to hurt the frame times quite severely. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was another DirectX 11 game I benchmarked, and this title actually didn't really show any differences regardless of which benchmarking tool I was using. For the average frame rate, it was pretty much a tie, and the frame times were actually just slightly better with OCAT on, but this is all pretty much margin of error stuff. So let's move on. Ghost Recon Wildlands did show some performance differences as well across all three measured stats, although they weren't as big as what we've seen with other titles. The difference with the average frame rate only came down to a loss of around 5%, not a huge loss there. And the 1% and 0.1% lows showed a loss of around 10% and 12% respectively. So this title is definitely impacted as well, depending on which benchmarking tool you'll be using. Moving on, we'll be taking a look at Battlefield 1, and this was another title that showed huge performance differences when looking at the average frame rate. When benchmarking with Fraps, the resulted average FPS was 179, and with OCAT it was 149. That is a huge loss of 30 FPS, or 20%. Meanwhile, the 1% low showed a difference of around 4%, so not a huge loss there, but the 0.1% low did exhibit a more noticeable change though, resulting in a difference of around 21%, so those dips can hinder performance, especially in a first-person shooter like this. The last DirectX 11 title on the list was F1 2018. I usually always throw in one racing game into the benchmark suite since I know there are a lot of racing fans out there. This title showed the biggest disparity. I mean, don't get me wrong, even with the performance loss, you're still talking about attaining triple-digit performance. However, 212 FPS average compared to the 160 FPS average due to OCAT, that is an enormous hindrance at 33%. Not only that though, the frame time results also suffer too, where the smoothest gameplay is attained without OCAT. And when you're playing a game like this, which involves high-speed racing, you definitely want all the performance you can get. The next three titles I'll be showing you guys run on the DirectX 12 API, and they are Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Gears of War 4, and Forza Horizon 4. Unlike the DirectX 11 titles, these games exhibited different behavior with the two benchmarking tools, where regardless of which one I used, performance results were roughly about the same. I would say it's nothing noticeable and probably just within margin of error, except Forza Horizon 4 did show much better minimums without using OCAT, but the average frame rate wasn't affected all that much. Therefore, it doesn't really matter which game you're benchmarking on DirectX 12 with these tools, you should be fine for the most part, but I still recommend cross-checking the results with something different just in case. Finally, I wanted to show you guys the 10-game average. Looking at these results, we can see there's clearly a difference when using OCAT. The difference for the average frame rate was 12%, and the 1% and 0.1% lows showed a difference of around 10% and 14% respectively. Consequently, OCAT for DirectX 11 titles at least isn't something I would recommend you use, because for whatever reason it's causing a considerable performance hit and is preventing the hardware from showing its full capabilities. I was surprised myself when I saw the results, but I'm glad I found out about this because now I know that different benchmarking tools can also cause a variation in performance, and it can have an impact on what you perceive after looking at the results. I mean, take Far Cry 5 for example. With dips into the mid-50s, one might look at that and go, well, clearly this hardware configuration isn't great for this game, and I'm just going to look elsewhere. But no, that wasn't necessarily the case because without OCAT, it showed much smoother performance overall. That's one of the reasons why I decided to make this video for you guys. I just want to be transparent here and, so you guys can look at my results in the future and be confident with my findings. This also shows why you need to look at multiple reviews and as much data as possible before coming to a conclusion. Since the launch of the 3rd generation Ryzen processors, I've looked at a lot of reviews, and one thing I did notice was that there seemed to be a lot of disparity between different outlets. Now, this can't be narrowed down to one thing, obviously. There are so many variables and conditions that you have to take into account, like system hardware configuration, what graphics card was used, what RAM was used, was anything overclocked, BIOS versions, things like that. How was it cooled, different drivers, different game settings, and, different areas of testing. And now I've come to learn that depending on the benchmark tool alone, with everything else remaining the same, you might also see some different results. If there is some kind of issue with it, I do hope it gets fixed, because it is a pretty good tool to analyze performance when it actually works. Also, if you guys are willing to do so, let me know in the comments if you're experiencing something with OCAT as well. Test it out for yourself. Let me know what you guys get. Therefore, after seeing what I just showed you guys, it might be in your best interest to gather as much data as possible and do a bit of analysis on your own end before you make up your mind. Well, I hope you guys found this video to be informative and helpful. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out the video description for my other videos and ways to support the channel. And if you're interested in more content like this, then make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.